Hey guys and girls, happy holidays once again. Bored now, back with you for my latest review of Dexter New Blood. And this episode, it's episode 7 of technically season 9 overall, but of the first season, I guess, since it was brought back. And the episode is called Skin of Her Teeth, which relates to the body which Angela found in the cave at the end of the last episode, and the body which we find out early in this episode is Irish, who was the college friend who Angela lost all those years ago and inspired her to become a police officer and to investigate these kinds of cases. So, and it refers to the fact that they take a DNA sample from Iris's teeth to try and match it to Kurt's DNA, so to speak, and try and see if he was her kill, which they start to suspect in this episode. And so it's another really strong episode, and the season really has focus now, and this episode does a good job of sort of connecting the past to the present and connecting like Angela's past and the storyline that's going on currently. So it feels really satisfying, actually. I think they do a good job of it, and it's a good way to once again make you care about Angela and interested in her. So the way the episode opens is that Angela calls Dexter to the cave. Now, bearing in mind she's still a bit pissed with him at this point for lying and stuff, but the sort of end of the last episode was saying, I don't need Jeff, I need Dexter Morgan. So she wants his sort of forensics background and his expertise, and obviously he takes the sample, the DNA sample, and shows her a few little tricks, but he also explains to her about the hidden cabin, Kurt's hidden cabin. And again, Angela is a bit mad, but obviously it's another bit of thing of the puzzle that falls into place where she feels she's got enough to at least arrest Kurt. And there's a whole big drama in that scene because Harrison has gone for his first day at work. And I mean, you've got to love how naive Harrison is, because even though he's working and they actually bring Kurt in for questioning, he's still very much like, yeah, on Kurt's side, like defending him, saying he's still a good guy. Because he almost is like treating him as more like a father figure, because the whole thing comes up about the wrestling match at the end of the last episode where Harrison basically went overboard and broke the guy's arm. And obviously Kurt was there cheering him on. And Harrison just can't see straight. And there's a scene with Audrey, sorry, in this episode where Harrison wants to spend time with her and Audrey is a bit nervous around him, partly because of Angela catching them in bed together, but I think also because she was unsettled by the wrestling match, which is understandable, and Harrison's kind of a dick about that. But they're obviously again setting him on this path where Kurt is very much in his headspace and seems to be targeting Dexter's son and is playing him off against him once again. But this episode really confirms Kurt as like a really cerebral villain and a tough nut to crack for Dexter. I think because of how good the actor is and because of how the character has started to grow in the last couple of episodes, I think there's a focus now where the arc of the season involving Kurt and Dexter feels like the classic Dexter sort of battles against, like the villain of the season, a bit like Lithgow. A bit like the opening season, although that was a bit different anyway. But it feels sort of a bit more like classic Dexter, where it was at its best, where there was an arc and there was a focus. And I think one thing it sort of benefits from, unlike the original show, is that you haven't had so many of like the sort of weaker subplots that kind of have nothing to do with the main case of the season. You've had one or two. I mean, the Harrison stuff I haven't really been keen on, but at least some of that ties into this stuff as well. But yeah, again, Kurt really grows in this episode because they bring him in and they seem to have a fair bit of evidence because they've got a DNA match, although it comes out later they sort of say it's a 66% match, which actually later on there's enough doubt where they actually let him go, and it's a bit strange because some of them seem to be acting like this sort of clears him, this proves he's not guilty. Now it's partly on his story because he has a brief sort of like break and he asks for his lawyer, so obviously they've sort of talked strategy a bit, but then they call Audrey back in, and this is probably the scene of the episode because he explains to her then it was his father, or he claims it was his father who killed Iris. And what's clever about this scene is you get like a flashback and he starts telling this story about how his father was a trucker and he was abusive to his mother, so Kurt sort of had to witness that in his past, and then you get like scenes of his father on the road, and Kurt says he started to realise his father was picking up young girls and attacking them, abusing them. And he tells this story about how he saw him pick up this young girl who's meant to be Iris, that's the idea, and then just drove off. So Kurt's like, well, I just hoped that he wouldn't do anything, that she would survive. And what's clever about this story is, first of all, some of it could be true anyway. Like, I think the stuff about an abusive like childhood could possibly be true. Like, he could be telling the truth about his father because maybe that's how this all started with Kurt. Like, maybe it's not that that's an excuse to act like a psychopath, no, but it sort of gives him that sort of past where maybe he's sort of tragically turned out like his father. Now, the other thing is, obviously, we know at the very least Kurt has killed girls in the present, so we've seen him kill girls, kidnap girls, so we know that he's kind of the main man in town that Audrey's been looking for. Sorry, Angela's been looking for. It's confusing when they both start with A like that, but I guess there's some doubt over whether he actually killed Iris in the past. Like, it could be that his father was doing murders originally, you know, kidnapping girls, and then later on Kurt sort of continued it. But anyway, it's clever because I think we all, probably most of us, would come to the conclusion that Kurt probably kidnapped Iris as well. Irish, I should say, all those years back, because obviously he's old enough where it's sort of whatever it's meant to be. Like, was it 25 years, 15 years, something like that? But he's obviously old enough where he would have been adult age and old enough to have done that kidnapping and murder as well. But it's just clever because you see it play out in the flashback and you see Kurt telling the story, but in a way he's sort of telling his own story, or at least I think we're meant to think that because he's the villain of the season, but there's some element of doubt. So it's a really clever scene, and it obviously leads to an element of doubt with then the DNA stuff, which is enough to get him released because they don't seem to have enough clear-cut evidence. There's just a couple of jarring moments, like just stuff with like Logan where he actually seems to be like shaking Kurt's hands and saying, I'm sorry we put you through this, and it's just a little weird that they would, some of them at least, would then assume that Kurt was innocent. You know, there's clearly some element of doubt because there's a 66% match and all that. You've got the cabin and excuse me, and the whole thing. But anyway, this episode really sets up a full-on Kurt Dexter type feud, And the other interesting moment, which I think again adds like value to Molly's character in this, is we actually see how smart she is and why she is like a good like true crime podcaster. Because Angela's mad with her because she finds out that she went to Kurt behind her back even though she told her not to, and like recorded him, and she obviously plays some of that. But the big reveal is that Molly actually figures out that Dexter must have recorded her and Kurt at the bar, because she says, which answers one of my questions from last week, but she says then while they were having the conversation, he left his phone on charge at the bar. And because they're sitting in the bar at the time, and I mean, it's a bit convenient, but they're roughly the same distance as Dexter would have been from the bar. And there's two people at the bar talking at the time. And Molly says, we can't hear them. We can't hear what they're saying. Because at one point Angela says, well, maybe Dexter just overheard them. Because she tells the story of how he went to the cabin, but how did he know? So based on that, Molly figures out then he must have recorded the conversation. So that's definitely going to throw some more heat on Dexter from Angela. And I think, although I've had in the past they've overdone the whole are they going to find out about Dexter's past thing, this actually does feel a bit more fresh, and I think the plotting of it is a bit more satisfying and like intriguing. And I think because Angela's a solid character as well, then it's very interesting stuff where it's sort of leading, and I do like that. Because I think Molly has grown as a character. Like, she's not the best character, but I think she really showed us smarts in that episode, in that scene. So they figured that out. And the other big reveal, which I guess isn't a total surprise, but it adds a bit more context, is then Harrison remembers about the killing of Rita back in episode 4. He sort of has visual memories of Trinity, of John Lithgow, and this is where we get a big John Lithgow cameo, which is fine. And he tells Dexter this, then he actually remembers that day and remembers him, and so it explains a lot about Harrison's aggression and his frustration, and because Dexter sort of stops him from like going after some more guys. Like bullies, they're like friends of like the wrestling guy in like a parking lot. And again, a lot of the Harrison stuff I'm just phased out on, but at least in this episode it relates a bit more to the plot. And by the end of the episode, Dexter is sort of saying to himself, I need to tell him the full truth. You know, it's that idea of handling the narrative and the truth, and at this point it's just better to tell him everything, otherwise things could really get out of hand. I could lose him. And it's at that point where he actually gets kidnapped by somebody, and that's the end of the episode. I'm assuming maybe someone to do with Kurt, but I'm not too sure. And the other thing is that Kurt also reveals to Dexter that Nanny knows about him killing his son. He reveals that he figured it out, and that the body didn't burn that night when Dexter was supposed to burn him. There's little nitpicks, because I would have thought as a forensic expert in the past, Dexter might have known that, you know, you can't burn, you know, metal, like, sort of thing. But I think it's metal, something it gets brought up. But it's a strong episode. It really has focus. I actually quite some of the Deb stuff in this, because obviously I've not been that into her as like the Dark Messenger, but some of the debates they've had in this episode feel a bit more satisfying, you know, when they're talking about should Dexter handle this whole thing or should he just leave it to the cops? And based on the past, Dexter's almost like, well, it's sometimes best to leave it to the cops, and let Angela deal with it, and it's almost for the good of his relationship as well. But Deb's actually saying, yeah, leave it to the cops, look what that's achieved, and sort of reminds him that in a way that's how she ended up dead, in a way, I guess. But it's just one of these things. But it's actually one of the more engrossing Deb Dexter debates, with her as the Dark Messenger. So yeah, good stuff. This season has really kicked into gear, and I think it's really shaping up to be one of the best seasons of Dexter. And it's a surprise, really, because the first couple of episodes I wasn't into it, and there's still been ropey moments, but I think it's gone from being a bit better than I expected to actually being generally quite engrossing and interesting. I think they've gotten that sort of focus and arc and like sort of thriller type feel that the best seasons of the original show had. So I'm into it. I'm into what's happening for the most part. That's Dexter New Blood for the week. Skin of her teeth. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you've been watching along. Like and subscribe. Share me out on social media, and you can also support the channel now on Patreon. Patreon.uk. Patreon.com/boardnow for more exclusive reviews, commentaries, all the rest of it. But thanks for listening, and goodbye.